One day the 12 apostles were arguing, as they usually did. You wonder why people in the church argue. They were arguing even back in Jesus' time. But who was the greatest? Jesus guessed what they were talking about and said some surprising words that turned their whole world upside down. If someone wants to be first, they must be last of all and the servant of all. Jesus does give us these paradoxes time and time and time again. Just when we think Jesus is going to go right, he takes a sharp left, and vice versa. Just the time when we think we know the mind of Jesus, he turns us on our heads, and rightly so. He then did something that went along with his words about being a servant by looking for a child in the crowd. Maybe it was a child that was abandoned on one of the street corners of Cupertino. He took the child, placed him in the middle of the gathering of the future church. That little child was in the middle of the gathering of the future church, and said to them, "Whoever welcomes a child like this one in my name welcomes me." Jesus identifies himself with the child he had just taken into his arms. He affirmed that a child like one of these represents him the best. So that welcoming such a child is equivalent to welcoming him. Does the church do this today? Just turn on the news and you will see it does not. But it's good at other things, isn't it? It is good at hiding pedophilia. They're great at that. It's good at moving a priest from one parish to another who abuses children. Isn't that so? We just heard a couple 3 weeks ago, about the 300 priests in one area over the last 30 to 40 years. That number is astounding when you think of it. 300. Let that soak in. 300 people. I don't call them priests, I call them people. Abused other children, over 1,000, that we know of. That we know of. How many are there that we do not know of? How many of these people were abused? And not just children either, adults as well. But today we talk about children because Jesus takes one of these in his arms and says, if you take this child as me, the Father will see that, and the Father will love you for it. Jesus says in another gospel, if you do anything to bring a person against their faith, you better tie a millstone. You know what a millstone is? It's a big, up in New Hampshire, there's a lot of millstones. A millstone grinds wheat. They're quite large. They can be quite big, and they were big in Jesus' time. Better you tie it around your neck and throw yourself into the water with it than to hurt one such as these. But that's what we have today. That's what we have to deal with today in the church. Not very happy news. Not happy news at all. Jesus' words, he calls himself the Son of Man in this gospel. And the Son of Man will be delivered up. Jesus' words can be understood to mean human beings are delivered up into the power of other human beings. And we see this so many times in our world, whether it's trafficking of bodies, sex trafficking. Human beings are using other human beings like no other time in history. Particularly during his arrest and his harsh treatment, that harsh treatment that was inflicted on Jesus, once again it becomes clear that human beings treat their fellow human beings who are defenseless in whatever way they wish. The rich treat the poor with disdain and make them work till they almost drop. Today, throughout the world, in China in particular. Today, even in the United States, a family has to work 2 or 3 jobs. The mother can't stay home anymore. When I grew up in the 50s, my mother could stay home and my mother could watch the kids. And she did, just about till Sheila was ready to go to school. She didn't have to work. That's amazing when you think of it. And that's really how it should be when you think of it. That at least one of the parents, doesn't matter if it's the father or the mother, but that child be not sent off to something that we call daycare. Not that they're not being treated right, but they're not with their family, let's face it. And that is the lesser of 2 evils. Either go on welfare or put your child in daycare. But there's definitely something very wrong with our society from the 1950s until now. Something has happened where the rich want to become richer. It's not good enough to be a millionaire anymore, that's passé. You have to be a billionaire and a trillionaire to be in this world. This is a very sad expose on our society, but true, but so true. People do not treat each other with respect and dignity, and that stops at the top. And it starts with words. From our president to our popes to the Dalai Lama, these people, it starts at the top with words and the words that come out of their mouth. We see today that people even within families show no or little respect that we did have at one time. It's not surprising, therefore, that Jesus recognizes himself as a child, because children are so often totally at the mercy of those who have power over them. Children are very much like the poor. Children are very much like the elderly as well. These little ones are vulnerable. Jesus showed particular concern for children because he wanted his followers to be particularly attentive to the poor and the defenseless, and the church has fallen flat on its face. Flat on its face. It's not even that they did a nominal job, a just so-so job. They did a rotten job. A rotten job. It is terrible what has happened in our church. And like the news, we go from one story, we forget about that story, and then there'll be 500 priests, because now the attorneys general through the United States are looking into other dioceses, and rightly so. And they are to pay dearly if it bankrupts the Roman Catholic Church to the point where they don't have a penny. Good for them. May God strike them for their evil deeds, and for their cover-ups, may God strike them. And he is striking them. And it is just the beginning in the United States. We see also in Ireland the same thing. Abuse by nuns and priests and brothers. These are not nuns and priests and brothers. I don't know what you want to call them, but they are far from anything I would call a nun or a priest or a brother. And it's so systemic. It is rotten to the core throughout the church. If you can find 300 priests in Pennsylvania, there are thousands upon thousands throughout the world that have put this abuse on children, that have put this abuse even on adults. Jesus shows us concern for children because he wants us to be attentive. And until the end of time, we'll always have children with us. We're always going to have the poor with us. We're always going to have those elderly with us, the vulnerable. Jesus says, you'll always have the poor, they'll always be with you. What is done to them will be done to him. That's a sin. Whatever was done to them was done to him, the least of his brethren. So we are to take the road to help the poor. That's the road we are to take. We are to take the road to help the sick. We are to take that road to help the downtrodden. That road is necessary in order to be with any type of communion with God. And if we don't do it, you're wasting your time. Stay home. If Jesus placed a child in the midst of the disciples to show them as an example that they were to be themselves like a little child, that's what Jesus is telling them. You have to be like this little child, vulnerable. He explains to them that this is the teaching. For whoever gives you a glass of water because you belong to Christ, I tell you the truth that a person will not lose their reward. Whatever you do, no matter how small or how grand it is, whatever you do it for him. Whether you're babysitting or whether you are taking care of the elderly or helping someone clean a house that needs help. Whatever you do for him. And whatever you don't do, good for you. Walking along this road, taking that road, the world will see the kingdom of God. And until the church takes that road to help the poor, to help those who are in need, then I don't think God will bless the church at all. He will deliver it into human hands, and that's exactly what he's doing now. They will never know ahead of time how they will be welcomed until we welcome the poor. But even for those who welcome them with a simple glass of cold water, they will have God in their presence. Even if you give someone a glass of water, to someone in need, if you visit the sick and the elderly, if you are good to children, and if you love them, God will bless you. Sometimes it is difficult on this earth. It's not easy. We have to juggle a lot of different things, don't we? We have to work. We have to provide for our families, and we have 100 million things to do. But one of the things that we also need to do is extend that hand to the poor, to the elderly, and especially, as Jesus said today, to children. And if we do that, you're going to be all right. So there is happiness and joy in doing good, isn't it? Amen.